So, Dead Island Riptide, there has been a fair amount of confusion around this game since it was announced last year, and I know a lot of people wondered, myself included, is this DLC or is it a standalone game? And if it is a standalone game, is it a spin-off or a sequel? A lot of those questions have been answered already, except for one. Is this game good? I'm going to answer that right now.
Help! You like that?
The story in Riptide picks up where the first Dead Island left off. Our four survivors, a rapper, a former football star, a bodyguard, and a hilariously racist-sounding Chinese spy, are fleeing the island of Benoi after an outbreak has turned all of its citizens and unsuspecting vacation-goers into slobbering, squealing, flesh-eating zombies. Of course, nothing is ever as simple as it seems, and our crew soon finds themselves back on land on the nearby island of Palani, this time with an extra crew member, John Morgan, a former Navy man turned cook with an expertise in hand-to-hand combat. Like the other survivors, Morgan is also immune to the zombie virus and one of the few humans capable of traveling outside the city's safe zones. The downside to this, of course, is that you're basically the town mule. Anything that needs to be transported somewhere or looked into becomes your responsibility, and from there, the fetch quests just keep on piling up. With regards to the actual storyline, the writers have obviously attempted to inject some form of excitement, but it falls flat in large part thanks to the game's characters. Uninteresting personalities, mediocre voice work, and some downright creepy facial animations make it hard to take anything seriously. Not that it matters, because the plot is so utterly banal, I honestly can't tell if it's meant to be satirical or not.
Take the immune down to the lab. The two others will come with me.
Lab?
Hey, do we look like goddamn guinea pigs
I'm
to
a
you?
citizen of the USA, man! I got motherfucking rights!
Okay, let's not kid ourselves. Despite whatever trailers and marketing you might have seen, Dead Island is not an emotionally moving game. It's not even a moving game. It's a game where you glue a bunch of nails to a baseball bat and bludgeon a poor old granny's head in. And you know what? That's fine. Techland understands that there's a market for that, and they've clearly claimed their stake in it. But how much has really changed from the first Dead Island to this one? Apparently, not as much as you might think. Techland didn't exactly give themselves a whole lot of breathing room with a name like Dead Island, but the environments in Riptide are still fairly similar to those in the first game. The key difference is that Palani is in the midst of monsoon season, causing heavy rains to sweep through the island. Sunny beaches have been traded for flooded jungles, paving the way for new and more terrifying strains of infected. Drowners, for instance, will float atop the water, giving off the appearance of being dead before popping up at the last second to choke you. Other new enemies, like the Grenadiers and the Wrestlers, are insanely strong and require different tactics than what you're used to. Fortunately, the town's citizens have erected ladders and built forts all over the island to offer some much-needed reprieve when things get too hectic on the ground floor.
Come on, Daddy needs some new shit.
Now, one of my biggest complaints from the first Dead Island was the rate at which weapons degrade, and thankfully, Riptide is far less punishing with weapon degradation. Tons of benches are scattered around, allowing players to repair, upgrade, or attach mods to their weapons for extra damage and some really awesome effects. All of the best weapons in the game can be earned by either completing side quests or thoroughly searching each area for blueprints. I was, however, a little disappointed by the scarcity of new weapon mods. I collected 37 mod blueprints during my playthrough, and only 3 of those were brand new and hadn't already appeared in the first Dead Island in some capacity or another. Weapons also seem to be the cause of some balancing issues in Riptide, as I spent the first few hours of the game dying every 5 minutes, only to discover an awesome weapon that made the rest of the game far too easy. This wouldn't have been an issue if the difficulty setting could be changed mid-game, but alas, that is not an option.
Oh, thanks, doll.
Like the weapon upgrades, the skill trees in Riptide also haven't changed much. When starting up a new game, players can either import their old save file or start from scratch at level 15, allocating skill points wherever they like. Trees are split up into 3 branches for survival, combat, and a special one called Fury that temporarily pauses time and grants the player Wolverine-like strength. This is best reserved for bosses or groups of zombies who must be approached with extreme caution. Even 2 of them can kill you if you're caught off guard, and a lot of the strategy in Riptide becomes learning when to fight and when to run. There are, however, certain cases where you'll be forced to fight. The campaign contains a few tower defense sections where players must defend a fort from hordes of zombies while safeguarding the lives of their teammates. These actually make for some of the most thrilling sections of the game, simply because of the creative freedom they allow for. Unlike most survival horror games, which purposefully deprive the player of resources, Riptide hands them 20 Molotov cocktails and a rifle that shoots electricity and tells them to go nuts. It's bizarre because for all the attempts it makes to take itself seriously, Riptide never even remotely feels like a serious game. The intentionally tragic marketing, the overly cliched characters, the god-awful attempt at a story, it's downright cringeworthy at times, but it never quite feels fully tongue-in-cheek. I mean, it's a game where you can curb stomp a zombie until their head falls off and blood spurts out of their neck hole. Why does it need to be serious at all? Truthfully, it's the kind of game that should lend itself perfectly to co-op, and in many ways it does. It's surprisingly good fun, it supports up to 4 players, and the matchmaking system has been retooled, so you can still play with your friends even if they're further along in the story than you are. It's a better co-op experience than the first game, to be sure, but it still suffers from needless frustrations. During my playthrough, the mission objectives and waypoints only seem to show up on my minimap, not my partner's. We happen to be playing in the same room together, but imagine if we weren't and one of us didn't have a mic. It would be utter chaos. I also found it frustrating that upon entering a new area, teammates will often spawn at different times, giving zombies a chance to gang up on certain characters before the other ones have had a chance to arrive. It may not seem like a huge deal in retrospect, but for a low-level character, those 5 seconds of alone time can be the kiss of death. I was hoping the single-player campaign would be a bit more polished, but unfortunately, many of the technical issues I experienced in the first Dead Island, like unwieldy controls, bizarre respawn points, and accidental self-harm, are still present in Riptide, with seemingly no effort made to improve them. Considering the success of the first Dead Island, Riptide should have at least had a baseline from which to improve itself, but it's clear these issues were not a priority. It's also important to remember that even though the first Dead Island technically succeeded, it did so in spite of itself. That game was a janky, bug-filled mess when it launched, but people forgave it because the gameplay was so fun and so unlike anything on the market. In the case of Riptide, though, the novelty has worn off, and the end result is something that feels far more forced. When it comes down to it, Dead Island Riptide feels like one giant missed opportunity. This was Techland's big chance to fix people's problems with the first game and throw in some really awesome new features. Instead, they chose to focus on superficial changes that add little to the experience and only serve to remind people how utterly broken the first game was. If you've never played the original Dead Island, I highly recommend trying that one out before jumping into Riptide. Yes, the first game is a little more rough around the edges, but it's just as enjoyable as Riptide, and at half the price, it's a better introduction to the series and its characters. For those of you who have played the original Dead Island and were hoping to hop back into Riptide for more fun, it could very well be worth your time, as long as you don't go in expecting a ton of improvements. The scenery and the story may have changed, but underneath, it's all pretty much the same. For that, I give Dead Island Riptide a 2 out of 5. So that is my review of Dead Island Riptide. I want to specify that this is sort of on the upper end of a 2, lower end of a 3. It was really hard to decide, but I was a tad disappointed. I really thought that they had something special with the first game, and I was so hoping that they were going to do something even better with this one. But almost all of the problems that were there before are still there, and for a game several years in the making, it's just not forgivable anymore. But who knows, maybe you'll feel differently. The game is out tomorrow on Xbox, PS3, and PC, and I'm dying to know what you guys think, so please leave your comments down below. And of course, if you like this review, feel free to hit that like button. No pressure. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.